helix, the structure of DNA, April of 1953, is published. The double helix has two strands running in anti-parallel directions, 5' to 3', 5' to 3', anti-parallel directions, and it has a perfect base pairing between purines and pyrimidines. If you have a T, and I'm just going to draw this very quickly, you can look in your book for getting it just right, you have 2 hydrogen bonds, and if you have, that's T and A, and if you have a C, you have 3 hydrogen bonds that perfectly hold it to the G, etc. So notice C and G fit perfectly together to make 3 hydrogen bonds. A and T fit perfectly together to make 2 hydrogen bonds, and that was the key, was to recognize that when you stick them together in that way, you get exactly the same width. They fit perfectly. You couldn't match an A with a G, an A with an A, an A with a T. You can only A with a C. You can only match the A with the T. That was it. Brilliant, beautiful. Now, you guys should read Crick's book, The Double Helix, in which he tells the stories, because it's just a fascinating business. He'll tell, or others will tell, actually, the story. So this, you know what this means, by the way? This means that the amount of A should equal the amount of T, and the amount of G should equal the amount of C. There should be a ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio. That the A to T ratio should be 1-to-1, and the G to C ratio should be 1-to-1. Although any organism might have more A's and T's than G's and C's, the ratio of these guys should be 1 and these guys should be 1. This actually was discovered by a chemist at Columbia called Chargaff. These were called Chargaff's rules. Chargaff was a very distinguished chemist who came up with Chargaff's rules, that the A's equals the T's and the G's equals the C's, and he didn't know what to make of it. By the way, Chargaff actually visited Cambridge, England, while Crick and Watson were there before their discovery, and he had lunch with them. And he related that Crick and Watson seemed like bozos to him because they couldn't even keep straight the exact structure of the 4 bases. They always had to keep looking it up. They hadn't memorized the structures of the 4 bases. And Chargaff was such a brilliant chemist. He, of course, knew this instantly, et cetera, et cetera. And he couldn't, and he said, you know, these guys are never going to get anywhere because they really don't even understand the structure of the bases. They haven't memorized it. When Crick and Watson's discovery turned out to be the single most important biological discovery of the 20th century, Erwin Chargaff, who lived a very long life, was sort of bitter because he had kind of worked it out in a way with the ratio and had never figured out what it meant. And he said one of the bitterest, cuttingest comments I've ever heard from a scientist, which is referring to Crick and Watson and still not being impressed even after they won their Nobel Prize for this. He says, that 2 such pygmies should cast such giant shadows only shows how late in the day it is. Oh. Anyway, he was not happy to have missed this point. Crick and Watson were very happy to have figured this out. They, when they figured this out in February of 1953, what do you do in England when you make a big discovery? No, you don't have tea. You go to the pub. They went to the pub. They ran down to the Eagle pub. They bought everybody drinks, and they told everybody at the Eagle pub, we've discovered the secret of life. The people at the Eagle pub had no idea what they were talking about, but were happy to have a round of drinks, and there you go. They immediately raced to write this up in Nature, It appears in Nature in April of 1953, and it's a one-page paper, and get it on the web and read it. It's the single best one page that has been written in biology in the 20th century. And of course, what do they say? You know, the title is kind of unassuming, a structure for the, for the salt of deoxyribonucleic acid. Nothing too exciting. But Crick and Watson realized something. What do they realize? Crick and Watson realize, why is this a big deal? Why is this double helix so important? Well, the implication of the double helix is that if I have a double helix and those strands were to separate, each would be a template for a double helix. Heredity. How do you pass information to two daughter cells? You got a double helix. It's redundant. If you know the A's on one strand, you know the T's on the other. Unzip it, copy, voila. I now have two copies of heredity. What's a mutation? Occasionally get it wrong. Bingo, they saw it, they knew. Now, they didn't have time to prove this. I mean, who has time to prove this? This is such an exciting discovery. Secret of life, drinks for everybody. They write it up, but in the last paragraph, they certainly don't want anybody to think that they missed the point. And they write the coyest sentence in molecular biology. They write, "It has not escaped our notice that this structure offers an explanation for heredity and mutation." We'll address this in another paper. Cute. Very cute. They put down their marker. They knew what it meant, but they got the thing off to Nature very quickly. It was a hot topic. They were competing with other people. You'll read about the competition with Linus Pauling and other things like that. It had not escaped their notice that this pretty much explained heredity. Now, of course, are you convinced that it explains heredity? It's a nice model, but don't we require proof? We do require proof. It's an ex post facto model. We need proof. It's a pretty good ex post facto model, but we need proof. So the last step, which I'll touch on very briefly, was proof of what's called semi-conservative replication. Meaning that each strand is used for the other, and I might run 2 minutes over, we'll see, I'll try to keep it to within time. Out at Caltech, two graduate students, Frank Stahl and Matt Meselson, hear of this. Matt Meselson, by the way, is still working in Harvard Square. He's at Harvard, he's a wonderful guy. Matt is there, you could ask Matt about this. Young graduate student at Caltech in the early 50s. Obviously, this model looks like it must be right. How do you prove it? Well, Matt and Frank, Meselson and Stahl, came up with a cool experiment to prove it. Meselson and Stahl, they take bacteria. There's my DNA in there. They want to show that each strand, when we make a new generation of bacteria, the new DNA has one old strand and one new strand. That each old strand is being used as a template for a new strand. How are we going to tell? We got to label it somehow. We got to label the old strand different than the new strand. How do we possibly label them? They're the same chemical composition. What are we going to do? Radioactivity or some kind of isotope. Well, they used an isotope. What they did, super cool, they grew this up not in normal nitrogen, but in N15. not, by the way, radioactive, but different weight. They grew it up in N15. They had bacteria that had grown up, and all their DNA had lots of N15 in it on both strands. They then pour in a lot of medium that has N14. Tons, they swamp it with N14, so what's this strand going to be? N14. So what can you tell me about the difference between this DNA and that DNA? One's going to be lighter. How do you measure how much lighter it is? They invented the technique for this purpose of centrifuging in a salt gradient. They put in the right amount of salt, cesium salt, and they centrifuge it so hard that there's a gradient of densities, denser here, lighter here, and they find that this DNA and this DNA centrifuge to different places. There's a difference in their density. The new DNA is half old, N15, half new, N14. It has the intermediate density. If I grow another generation, I'm going to see some N15-14s, and I'm also going to see some N14-14s. And that's what they found. They invented this technique. It's called isopycnic centrifugation. And Matt Meselson and Frank Stahl provided an experimental prediction of the beautiful Crick-Watson model that was, it's fair to say, the secret of life. Anyway, these are the foundations. Notice now we've taken genetics and used it to do biochemistry. We've taken biochemistry and used it to understand genetics. And so finally, we are making the bridge of molecular biology. Next time.